right. Hello, and welcome to another Transform Your Ear live talk. I have got a really cool session planned for you guys. But first, before we get into it, put in the comments where are you watching from? If you have any questions while we're going through this, please go ahead and put them in there and we'll do our best to try to answer those. So, I have a very special guest today who is an expert teacher, been doing this for a long time, known him for a long time, and he's specifically an expert in rhythm. And that is exactly what we are going to be going through today. My special guest is named Brian Fish. Brian, how are you doing, man?
Great, Dylan. How you doing?
I am doing great. It is awesome to have you. The first thing, before we go into what we have planned today and everything, first, why don't you just give us a little bit of background on yourself? How long have you been teaching? How long you've been doing this and so on, playing guitar, all of that good stuff.
Okay. I've been teaching for over 30 years. Started playing when I was 13, which was quite a few years ago. And um, I played for many years, honestly, starting as the 13-year-old. I had guitar and I thought I played okay, played in like your typical high school bands, but really struggled with a lot of the basics and things like that. And then later on in life, found a really good teacher that's helped me out and went to college. Honestly, not sure I would go that route again. There's courses like yours with the ear training, which honestly, if you take those, you get, I think, more out of those than you do out of most college courses. Which is really why I ended up really delving deep and studying rhythm on a really deep level, and came up with some stuff on my own, a course that I do, and that was really because that was one of the things when I started off I struggled most with. So I really had to focus hard on that if I was going to be playing in bands, which I have for many, many years now.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, the actually you had just hinted at my next question is you said you struggled with rhythm. And I think a lot of guitar players struggle with rhythm. This is something that I think is a weakness in a lot of players. When people first learn, you learn the basic strumming patterns, you get it down with the chords, and really after that, a lot of people don't study rhythm too much. Why do you think rhythm is kind of a weak point in a lot of guitar players?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. One is a lot of modern players rely on tab, and the tab's getting better. There's more and more rhythm being added to tab, but it's always people are so focused on the numbers, where to place your fingers, that they forget about the little marks underneath, and that you're supposed to count along with those numbers. That those little marks actually mean something.
Yeah.
And the other thing is honestly, rhythm isn't like as cool of a subject as it seems like. People obsess on their modes or their chords, and we happen to do two of the things that are super important, but there aren't always the ones that people are always talking about. I mean, if you have a trained ear, for you, it's
Yeah.
super important. And really, you're training your ear. That's part of recognizing to be able to play rhythms. And it's not just asking someone, can you play that? Or needing to listen to recording and doing your best to imitate it. It's being able to know, no, this is the exact rhythm I want to play right now, and being able to execute it and execute it every single time. And
Yeah.
that's what the really good players do.
Yeah. Yeah. I
The
think
amateur sounding players do the guessing.
exactly. I think with these two topics, with rhythm or ear training, I think the reason a lot of people miss it, piggybacking on what you said, is there's a delayed gratification that comes along with it. I think a lot of people practice with, I don't know, ego or what they want the most in mind right now, as opposed to what will be best for them in the long run. Right. So that's why people focus on speed and modes and sweep picking and all these things are great. I spent a lot of time on it, but really becoming a master at rhythm or ear training just allows you to do all of these things so much better. And you can have so much more fun with it. But with rhythm, now, Brian, were you self-taught when you first started playing?
Well, sort of. Like, no one's really truly self-taught,
Sure.
but yeah, I would try to pick up stuff from recordings. If there was anyone in school who knew something that I didn't, I would just bug them until they showed me.
Yes.
At that point in time, there was Guitar for the Practicing Musician magazine. I think there
Uh-huh.
was also Guitar World. So it was
Yep.
always just, leafing through those, trying to pick out every little thing you could.
Yeah.
reading people's interviews, seeing how they practiced, and
right. Did you try to train your rhythm at this time, or was it more later until you found a qualified teacher to help you with it?
it wasn't until my 20s I understood that rhythm was important as it really was.
Yeah.
So I used the listen to the recording, do the best to remember what the heck was going on, and I really couldn't count. I
Uh-huh.
mean, even I was in high school band and stuff, but I was always listen to the guy next to me. What did he play? Okay, I'll play something really close to that.
Yeah, close is good enough. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, man, the topic, as you know, today is your top 5 tips on how people can improve their rhythm, whether you are just starting out as a guitar player or you've been playing for a long time. These are some things that can really help you. But Brian, why don't you start walking through some of your top 5 tips?
Okay. Well, tip number one is really easy, and that's just have rhythm as a separate practice item and just practice it for a few minutes every single day. And really, if you separate a lot of things, so if I'm learning something new, a lot of people will just try to learn everything at the same time. They're going to try to learn what your fretting hand's doing. They're trying to learn what their picking hand's doing, and they're trying to learn the rhythm. Whereas to me, those are like three separate things. I want to work on the motions of my fretting hand. I want to work on the motions of my picking hand. And then I want to put down the guitar at first and just work on counting and saying the rhythm. Because if you can say it, you can play it. So you want to work with any rhythm that you're struggling with until the point where you can say it. I also like the clap rhythms. That helps me out, helps thinking like a drummer. But if I can keep that going on its own and do that consistently, when I bring it back to the guitar, it's just so much easier. So one of the big mistakes is it's just a lot of people, I think, practice rhythm as an afterthought. It's the thing that goes along with the chords or the scales that you're working on, whereas it really needs to be its own individual practice item and something that you really focus and work on. And if you do that, the other things you're trying to learn all of a sudden magically become so much easier to play. So have you found the same thing they're doing?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The thing you said in the beginning where you just people are just taking on too much at once is a really, really common thing. Whether you're training ear training, rhythm, whatever it is when you focus on too many things at one time, you are just amplifying the difficulty. The more simple you can make it, the quicker you will learn it. I think it's hard for a lot of people because when you see this one big thing that you want to get down, whatever it is, people just want to go ahead and get it down right now. But practicing the entire thing all at once is what is going to absolutely take the longest. If you just break it up, simplify it, you learn it so much quicker, you know. But what kind of piggybacking on that, what's a very common mistake you see people making this? You already kind of said one thing, but what do you think is one of the most common mistakes people make in rhythm?
Not counting out loud. That's really the biggest. It's back to what we first talked about, and that's really the kind of the monkey see, monkey do method, which is I let me hear that, and then I'm going to imitate it. Whereas what you want to be able to do is create that rhythm yourself. You don't want to rely on having to hear someone else play that rhythm before you can create it. You want to understand the pulse that you're working with and the beat that you're playing over enough that you can just, as you imagine it in your head, you know exactly what you need to do to execute that. And that's really what practicing rhythm is all about. You need to have a way of counting rhythms. I actually have three different things I like using. If we're doing things that are just your typical quarter note, eighth note, or 16th note, our standard Western way of counting, the 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, or the 1 e and a 2 e and a, that works great. Okay. When it comes to triplets and more complex rhythms, quintuplets and things like that, to me, that system completely and totally breaks down. So at that point, I shift my thinking over, and I think in an Indian language called conical. Um, I just use that on honestly a very surface level. It's actually a very cool art if you're really into that itself. It's verbalizing percussive sounds. It's used for training drummers, and it's kind of become its own art on its own. But for me, the thing I care about is how does it make rhythm on any instrument easier to play. That's how I'm using it. And if you understand that system, which I teach along with Western counting, all of a sudden these really difficult rhythms, you're able to break them down and they make a whole lot more sense. And then I'll also use something called accent counting, which is just figuring out the accent pattern you're playing and being able to execute that. And the big thing too is when people get rhythms down, a lot of times I'll see people get down a rhythm down once and they're happy with that. Whereas to me, if you get it down once, it's a little celebration. You're happy that you got it down once, but now the work begins. Now we're after consistency. And I want to try to get that right. How many times out of 10? You know, if today I only get it 2 out of 10, that's okay. Now tomorrow when I practice, can I get it 3 out of 10? And the next, you just want to keep bumping that up. And for me, if I get it 9 out of 10, that's perfect. Okay. Because the amount of effort you're going to take to try to get 10 out of 10 every time is almost wasted effort. So if you get that 9 out of 10 consistently with a rhythm, then you're doing really good with that. And it's probably time to move on and work on a different rhythm, or at least find different things you can do with that rhythm at that point.
Okay. What would you say to the people that would tell you, well, I just play by feel. I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't really know what beats I'm playing on or anything like that, but I can just feel it.
95% of the people who tell me that,
yeah,
I know you play by feel because you're no fun to play with.
yeah, that's exactly it.
All right. A small handful of people do just kind of have a natural feel. My guess is they grew up around people who listen to music or played music, and whether they know it or not, they've been trained at a young age, and they know the rhythms, even if they don't know how to count them. That they do have them internalized just because they've been around it for so long. But most people who play by feel really have no idea that their timing is not anywhere near where it should be. And that's one of the frustrating things. It might be the same with ear training too, with rhythm, is it's really hard at times to feel yourself getting better. So you really, that's just recording yourself and looking back or listening back a few months after you've recorded that. You'll see a big difference in what you're doing. So,
yeah, absolutely. And what would you say to someone who is just starting out in guitar and just starting to play? When do you think it's a good idea to start really focusing on counting and really understanding rhythm?
Right away, immediately. So it's okay. Because for a lot of beginners too, they're back to what we talked about in the beginning, they're trying to do everything at once. So for the beginners I'll work with, a lot of times, if we're working on switching chords, I'll have them just strum the chord once, maybe across 2 measures. Can we actually feel what the 2 measures is? If you need to be counting to do that.
Right.
Then can I switch the chord just on beat 1 of that next measure? That's huge for a beginner. If you can do that, you're playing in time. You can then go ahead and play with others. If you're trying to do all this other stuff and there's these big giant pauses between your chords and you're not sure if that was a 16th note or an 8th note and you've paused to think about that, the band's already left. No one's able to play with you at that point. Right?
Yes.
So you're left back here and we've moved on to the next part of the song. So it's really more important for you to just sit there as a beginner, play one chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, switch now. If you can get that down, and again, we're counting out loud. That's huge, is getting the feel of that pulse and the beat going. And if you can do that, it's gonna make everything you do sound better. If you're playing in time, even something super simple, you sound good.
Yeah, that always something simple, perfectly on time will always sound better than something really complex out of time. Right? Yeah. So even if you hit all of the right notes, but it's at the wrong time, it's all wrong. 100%. None of it's correct, but focusing on that from the very beginning, I absolutely agree with, and I don't think, at least in the beginning, it's something that a lot of people can really understand and get a grasp on. And doing what you said, where you just try hitting every other measure or one measure, is a really, really great place to start. But what's the next tip for people who want to improve their rhythm?
The next tip is break things in pieces. Like, say it's a full measure rhythm. There's a lot of rhythms, especially if we're dealing with a combination of 8th notes, 16th notes, rest, things like that. There's a lot to deal with. So what you want to do is, what's happening on beat 1? Can I play that in isolation? First off, can I count that in isolation? After I get that down, can I then play that small section of that measure in isolation? Then the same thing there. Can I now repeat that consistently in a row? You may want to start with, can I play it once a row, pause, and ask yourself, how did that sound? Did I get it exactly the way I want it to sound? If not, figure out what's wrong with it and fix it. Once you get that step down, then can you play that small portion of the rhythm 2 times in a row? Stop, pause, ask yourself, did I get it right that time? And then eventually, can you just consistently play it? And then you want to move on to the next part of the rhythm in isolation and do the exact same thing with that. And then you can piece together those 2 parts, play those back to back, that same thing. You're putting in pauses, you're constantly asking yourself questions. How did that sound? Is that exactly how I wanted that to sound? Did that match exactly how I was counting that? If you start asking yourself questions like that when you're practicing, instead of just mindlessly going through the motions, you're going to get a lot more out of what you're doing. And you just do that with every single beat until you've pieced together the whole rhythm. And then at that point, again, we can now play it once really good. Now I'm going to go for consistency on that rhythm. So it's being willing to break things into small pieces and parts. That's just a huge part of practice in general.
Yeah, that's a principle of practicing anything, especially rhythm, right? Just breaking it up makes it more simple, allows you to learn it way faster than just trying to take the entire thing, right? But let's say that someone is wanting to improve their rhythm. How do they determine what they should play? Should they just focus on songs that they like or focus on what they're doing? Or how do they determine on what they should actually play and what rhythms to do to improve?
Depends on the person, depends what their goals are, honestly. So if
Yeah.
your goal is to just strum and sing a few songs around your family or the campfire, then you just want to really, within those songs, within the style you're playing, you want to know which rhythms are really common. So, and a lot of people too, here's another little mistake, is they get hung up on playing the exact rhythm every single time. Once you
Yes.
get really good at playing within a certain style, most things I ever play are in the style of. So I have a beginning rhythm, and then once you've worked with this stuff enough, you can improvise and stay within that style, and it sounds correct. But a lot of people, especially tab readers, tend to get really hung up on, well, it says exactly right here that I have to do this little thing. And a lot of that stuff it's a judgment call. I mean, that's what that person did that one time. The chances of them doing that exact same thing again it depends what it is, but it's not real good.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It is something that is really specific to the person, But I think it comes down to if you are practicing a specific song or a specific solo or something like that, the first thing that'll be helpful is to chart out exactly what rhythms and beats things are happening. Now, do
Mhm.
you find it helpful to just think of, okay, this happens on the end of two in the measure, this happens on beat four of the measure? Or do you find it's better to say this is an eighth note, this is a dotted quarter, or would you say both?
I would say both. So, well, first off, you need to understand what the dotted eighth, what the quarter, what those are doing. And then after you understand that basic concept of in how to count those, then it matters where those fall within the measure. So, and if we're talking strumming for people like that, at that point, for a lot of those people, I'll have them go slow enough that you can literally talk your hand through the motions. Because a lot of times, if you're doing that type of strumming and that type of playing, it's more of a pendulum strum where that hand just got that constant down up motion going.
Right.
So it could be, down, down, up. There's a tie in there. There's a miss. You got to tell your hand to miss, or it's not going to feel real natural. And just go slow enough and literally tell your hand exactly what motions are going on. Because if you're able to tell your hand what's going on, you're able to play the rhythm much faster. Again, we're taking away the guesswork. Everything we're talking about is we don't want to be guessing about anything. We want to know exactly what's supposed to be going on and then be able to execute that consistently.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. I think doing both is very, very important. I think maybe, and we'll see what your thoughts on this, when you're first starting, just kind of focusing on this strum happens on beat one, this drum happens on beat two, and that kind of thing. And then bringing in the eighths and quarters What do you think about that order? Just thinking about what the beats are and then bringing in the notation afterwards? Or do you think it's something that you like to teach your students simultaneously?
If you're just beginning, I want you to know what each individual rhythm is in isolation. So again, we talked about starting with whole notes. Nothing wrong with whole notes. If they're in time, they actually sound really good,
Yeah.
especially if you're playing around others. Your audience doesn't know that you're the one playing the simple whole note. Okay. The group as a whole, if they're playing in time, sounds cool.
Yeah.
After that, I'll usually incorporate either quarter notes or a combination of quarter notes and half notes. Like if the chord change thing is difficult, do just 3 strums, 1, 2, 3, and then leave 4 blank. Leave a rest there, let that ring through. And then thinking with 1 chord, or you can also do just a muted hand too, and not even thinking chords. You can take each individual rhythm for an eighth note. Just get really good at 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so every time you see that, you know what it's supposed to feel like.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So you're
Oh, yeah.
working on these little tiny mastery cells, and once you get that down, then we work on, okay, what's this mastery cell sound like combined with this?
Hmm.
And it's just you're just adding little bits and pieces and finding as many ways as possible to mix and match those over time. And if you keep doing that, you get really good at it, and you can literally play thousands of rhythms just, pecking away
Yeah.
one rhythm at a time that way.
Yeah, yeah, and this kind of leads me right into my next question I had for you, and we'll get back to your specific tips in a moment. Hopefully, this doesn't spoil anything. But for people that are a little bit more advanced or intermediate in rhythm, what are some ways that they can be more creative with rhythm, as opposed to just playing the same rhythms over and over or playing other people's rhythms? How can you go about creating your own?
Okay. Well, even if let's say you have someone else's rhythm you're working with, there's a whole bunch of rhythms within that. So say we, have one set of rhythms on beat 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just start rearranging those and swapping those. If we have literally a separate rhythm on each one of those beats, and you can play those in isolation, if you find ways to mix and match those, if we're talking about one measure and 4 beats, there's 256 possible combinations of rhythms there waiting for you to explore just by mixing up those rhythms in different ways. Okay. Now, some of those are just repeating that first rhythm 4 times, or just taking a few of those and mixing and matching. But just take any rhythm that you run into and just find how many ways you can mix and match that up. On top of that, you can start adding root notes in. I'm still thinking strumming here. You could add muted notes into the strum, add ties. There's so many things you can just add to a rhythm that already exists that makes it sound slightly different and makes it your own. And the more you do this, the easier it is just to come up with that stuff as you're playing on the fly and you're improvising, in real time with that. And then as far as lead players go, if there's a lead line you've learned and there's a certain rhythm you really like the sound of, then write your own phrase. Like throw out what the other person did, but start from rhythm. Try it with just a pentatonic scale. Try it with a diatonic scale. Try it with an arpeggio. Try some combination of those. There's so many things. I write from rhythm all the time. It's one of my favorite ways to write, is just you can almost write a random rhythm down and be like, okay, how many things can I come up with from this rhythm? And that just the more you do that, the more solid your understanding of rhythm becomes. And honestly, the more creative you become and the more fun it is to play.
Yeah, so there's no lack of options.
No, when you think of, I mean, you start looking at the combinations of rhythms you can do, it's almost overwhelming when you think of the potential end results. But the cool thing is you'll really need to know a few things to get that many results. It's not like there's a million rhythms you have to remember.
Right,
By
right.
knowing a few different things, there's a million rhythms you can potentially create though. So,
Yes. Yeah, yeah, completely agree. I think kind of what you said too is to take something that you already know, if you want to be creative with rhythm, and just change one thing about it. Like instead of hitting there, add a miss. Or instead of just that one hit, add 2 hits and just start experimenting and be okay with coming up with stuff that you don't like. There's that common phrase of writing for the trash can. I think no matter how good of a songwriter or creator you are, that is always the first place. So be comfortable if you're trying to be creative with coming up with stuff and just trying different things. And sometimes it won't work out, sometimes it will, and that's completely okay. But Brian, what's the next tip for these guys on how to improve their rhythm?
Okay, we sort of alluded to this earlier, but record yourself and record yourself a lot. You need feedback. And if you're listening and you're not sure what you're hearing back, then honestly, you probably need to find a teacher to help you out and give you pointers on what's going on. But a lot of times when you're playing, you're so into that, you have no idea what it really sounds like to everybody else in the room. So it doesn't need to be anything fancy. Just pull out your phone, start recording some video of you playing, and then listen back and listen really critically. Can you actually sit there and keep time to what you're doing, or does it feel like it's going up and down and kind of all over the place? If you're counting to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, is there that mystery extra fifth beat that was actually, accidentally stuck in there? You're going to get all kinds of feedback just from recording yourself and listening back on a regular basis. And that really goes for everything, not just rhythm, but it's huge to be able to listen back to what you're doing. And you need that constant feedback. And the good thing about that too is a lot of times delete those recordings, but every once in a while, hang on to one. And then put a little reminder in your phone to look back at that in 6 months. Because if you're consistently working on rhythm and consistently working on improving it, you're going to hear a big difference in what you're able to do within 6 months' time. And with rhythm, you're constantly refining it and getting it better. So, and that's really one of the big things. When you're doing that too, do it along with the metronome. So you can hear back, am I playing with that click? Or am I getting ahead of that click? Am I falling behind that click? Is that click doing something completely different? It's not even in relation to what I'm playing. It's kind of surprising when you listen to recording the first time, what's actually going on compared to what you think is going on. So you just record yourself for everything.
Yes, it is. When you play, you hear it one way, and a lot of times, at least this is my experience, you think it's really good. And then when you listen to the recording, you can hear all of the flaws that are going on. It is a crucial way to improve, because I feel like it's a lot harder. You're focusing on playing and the techniques and all these other things that you can lose the small mistakes or big mistakes that are making. When you hear it back in recording, it shows you. But another huge thing that you said too is this is a way to track progress. So you want to keep some of these, because tracking progress is a way to keep yourself motivated and excited to keep going. If you keep practicing and practicing and practicing and feel like you're not getting anywhere, the odds of you continuing to be consistent are very, very low, unless you just have an insane amount of discipline. But if you don't think what you're doing is working, then the odds of you doing it isn't going to work. But the progress is a consistent thing that happens over time. It's very simple, Brian. I know you have kids. I have kids. When you first have that little kid and they're an infant, and then they're a year old, and you see a picture of when they were first born, you don't realize how much they've grown, right? The difference is massive. And it's the same thing with your progress. If you don't document it, you won't really know how much progress you've made really, really specifically. You might know a general, yeah, I've gotten a little bit better. I could do this. No, I can do this. But when you know, no, I've gotten significantly better in these last 6 months or a year, then imagine how much better you're going to be in another 6 months or a year. It makes things so much more fun, and you generally progress a lot quicker because you're more motivated to be there. And this isn't just advice for people that are just starting out. This is something that I've been playing for 20 years. Brian, you said you've been playing for 30 years. Is that right?
More than that.
More than that, or you've been teaching for 30 years.
Yeah. For 30 years.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you've got me beat. But it's a long time. We've been doing this for a long time. And this is stuff that we still do, so it's something that you absolutely should do. And I'm not saying you got to post this on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, or show anybody, but just keep it for yourself, put it in a folder. And after you've got 3 or 4 of these, I think if you're tracking progress, taking a video once a week to once a month is good. Now, to just see how good you're playing, you should do this very often. right?
Yeah.
So tracking progress, if you're keeping every video after every single day, that's going to be a little bit harder to see the gaps. But if you're just learning or you want to make sure something's perfect, record yourself often, like Brian's saying, and make sure that it is perfect. So that is an awesome tip.
Yeah. Or even just keep the good ones, because you're going to have some really bad ones in there.
Yeah, yeah, keep the good ones, you know? You don't have to tell anybody. You know? But what is the next tip on how to improve our rhythm, Brian? Or how many have you gotten through so far?
I went out of order, so I'm not even sure at this
Oh,
point.
that's fine with me. You got another one for us?
Um, record yourself, the tenor, consistency,
Yeah,
talk, separate practice item. I think we've got to 5, but
wonderful.
there's
Wonderful.
the
Well,
big thing is just it comes down to consistency. It has to be part of your practice schedule.
yeah.
And with rhythm, just know that you're not the recording thing we just talked about. You're not going to see the progress. Like Dylan was comparing it to seeing your kid grow. When you see your kid every day, until you look at a picture, you don't realize how much has changed. You know, how much progress and growth has happened. And the same thing's going to happen with your playing. If you're anything like me, you're never ever going to be satisfied with what you're doing today, because your level of expectations just keeps going. And then you're like, why can't I play here? And you get to there and you're like, why can't I play here? If
Yep.
that's your type of personality, which is mine, you're never going to be quite satisfied. And that's okay. It always gives you something to work on, but so that you want to be able to look back and see all that progress that you have made. I mean, I'm lucky we used to, put a boombox in the basement for our band practices in high school. And I've still got a tape player and those still work. And they're really bad.
Yeah.
But you know what? We had so much fun and we thought we were so awesome at that point. And for our age, we probably were pretty good.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd be so embarrassed if I recorded that today. But we played school dances, we did everything. We had a blast doing that band.
Yeah. Yeah. Seeing that progress. It's funny to listen to, but it's also nice to be like, yeah, I've gotten a lot better with it. But I've got another question for you is how important do you think being a really good rhythm guitarist is to being a really good improviser, a really good lead guitar player?
Well, you need to have good rhythm to be a good lead player, because rhythm's all about it's phrasing. It comes down to phrasing. You need to have it's a difference between hearing someone who's really interesting to listen to talk and someone who's just constant run-on sentences. And after a minute or so, you're rolling your eyes and wishing you would quit. I'm sure everyone's had that type of conversation before. What you want to do is have really distinct phrases and then be able to make variations on that phrase. You don't have to be playing like a million notes. You can actually, a good place to start if you're thinking with rhythm is just take a short little da, 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 da. How many things can I do off of that one phrase? Can you keep that going? Not for a minute, but for 3 or 4 minutes. Okay, it's going to force you just thinking with that one rhythm. You're going to start playing the same few licks over and over after about 30 seconds for most people. You're going to think you ran out of ideas. But if you try to keep that da, 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 da as a phrase going for 5 minutes, it's going to force you out of your comfort zone. And you're going to start trying things that you wouldn't normally try. So rhythm can be a great jumping off point for making you a better lead player.
Yeah.
And another thing you can do with that is from that phrase, treat that phrase as a question. And then so you play that da, 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 da. Okay, how do you want to answer that?
Yep.
And then I think of that phrase as being a toddler, where you're going to hear that same question over and over again, like all day long.
Yeah.
And then, so how many different ways can you answer that same question and keep it interesting for yourself?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
little rhythmic games like that really improve your lead playing.
Yeah. A fundamental part of lead playing, like you said, is variations. You want to play a lick, you want to play a phrase, and you want to develop it. Same way that a conversation would happen. You start on a topic and you develop that topic. You don't go from topic to topic to topic. You develop it, and it naturally leads into another one. One variation that gets passed over a lot is rhythm. Taking the exact same notes that you're playing and just messing with the rhythm. One thing that I like to do as an exercise is to actually just write out random rhythms on a piece of paper. Take a lick that I know and try to just fit it into that. Try it with triplets, try it with 16th notes, Try to just mess around with it. And that's another way of being creative. Is if you are just thinking in your mind what rhythms you want to do, this is great, but it can be pretty difficult to try to think that up and then play it. A really good workaround is to actually just write them out. Start simple, write out some quarter notes, play your riff to that. Write out eighth notes, play riff to that. Mix them, put in some dots, do whatever you want to do. I personally love doing triplets, eighth note triplets, quarter note triplets, and really just throwing it for a loop. It almost, oh, it's not, but it almost feels halftime. Sometimes I really like the sound of it. But when you do that, you figure out what rhythms you really like to use and what rhythms you don't like to use that much, you know? And if you're a speed player, you probably like 16th or 32nd notes. But could you add in some pauses in between there? One of the best ways to immediately improve your guitar soloing is to learn vocal melodies. Look up great singers and listen to how they sing and what they do and learn it note for note. And then analyze the rhythm that they're using. And then try to just completely steal that rhythm with other things you're doing. And it will literally make your guitar sound like it's singing because you're playing now like a singer. The whole point of improvising is to express something and to get your guitar to sound like it is talking. And the best way to get your guitar to sound like it's talking is to play like someone is talking. Think about like if you just say a sentence, try to then play that on the guitar, right? And don't even worry about matching pitches, just worry about matching the rhythm. So you can even get your phone out and just speak a paragraph and listen to the rhythm of that paragraph. When are the accents? When are the pauses? When are the run-on sentences or whatever that you're using? And try to express it through that and make it sound exactly like that. That's one of the best things you can do for your improvising. And the thing that we kind of said in the beginning is the thing that most people are lacking, whether it's rhythm guitar or lead or being creative, is your rhythm. So you want to put this on a schedule. If you don't make a practice schedule, you need to make a practice schedule so that you can plan out what you're doing, think ahead of time, and make sure that your rhythm training and, of course, your ear training gets enough time in that schedule. But have you tried this out before, Brian? Listening to the rhythm of vocal players or anything like that?
Yeah, and even like when you were just talking there, you started off with two fairly short sentences, and then your third sentence was fairly long. So
Yes.
even if you're just thinking of length of phrase, again, it's meant to be a conversation. Those are the types of lead lines that tend to be more interesting. So even if it's not the exact rhythm, can you at least do that? A short phrase, longer phrase, followed by whatever. And then just to kind of piggyback on your idea here, another thing I like to do is take one idea and what does it feel like to start just half a beat over? You know, move it through a measure, take that same thing, because starting at different spots in a measure with the same idea, it's a brand new lick. You've got
Yep.
something brand new.
And it was easy to make.
Yes.
It's just a little move, you know. One thing that I would like to do when I write music is I'll write a riff or something that I really like, but then I'll just add one extra beat randomly. So then it becomes a different time signature just for that moment. That's another really cool thing you can do in your soloing, in your lead playing, in your rhythm, whatever it is. But I think one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten is listen to the rhythm of a vocal player or listen to the rhythm of someone speaking. Unfortunately, I didn't come up with this on my own. Most things I didn't. I've learned it from other amazing teachers, but that is one of the best things. And you can even make it really fun and funny. Like if you like comedy, go listen to a comedian, listen to one of his jokes and try to emulate the rhythm, you know, like make it fun, have a good time, come up with creative ways to do things and put things into your rhythm. But that's one of the funnest things to do for me. Even one of the coolest things with rhythm is to do nothing. When you're improvising or when you're coming up with something, silence is one of the best ways to really bring in tension and to make things more interesting and to really grab people's attention. So when you stop playing, it's kind of like, and you get people to look over and listen more intently. But then when you finally start playing again, those rhythms and everything you use just means so much more. It's the same if you go like a long time without eating and you finally have that first meal, it usually tastes so much better. It's the same thing. So adding in silence and thinking to yourself, how many beats, how long of silence do I want? A whole note, dotted eighth, whatever, and then try to put that in there. So you don't always have to just be playing in your rhythm. You can remove stuff and that can make things sound even better. It can be like an amplifier. But silence, that I'm sure that's something that you talk about too, Brian, with your students or training in your course or anything like that.
Yeah, and rests are important. I mean, rests mean silence.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Rests
Yes.
don't mean I'm letting this note ring through, especially
Right.
if it's a part where the whole band's supposed to be stopping together. Make sure that you know how to make your instrument not make noise. That's super important.
Yeah.
And
When the whole band stops, that can be one of the coolest parts, or it can be a train wreck. If it's not tight, if it's sloppy, it's just hard to listen to. And if you're not counting, if you're not perfectly on time, chances are, if you're just feeling it, you're going to miss it. Even by a little eighth note, it matters.
yeah, and there's so many people who play off of feel. Like, I've worked with people in the past who, if the vocalist didn't sing their part exactly right, they wouldn't know what came in next because they were relying on the vocalist of
Yes.
all people
Yes,
to know when to play the guitar part.
that's one of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of people do is like, okay, when the singer says this, I'll
Then I
start
play
playing.
this.
Or just like when the bassist plays this or when the drummer does this fill, I'll do this. It's like, oh, I play with a lot of great musicians, but I don't have faith
No,
that they're going to be perfect every time. And they shouldn't have faith that I'm going to be perfect every time. We should rely on the rhythm. We shouldn't rely on these little silly cues.
yeah, but if we're all counting at the same time, we're all feeling that same tempo. If one of us gets off, it's really easy to get back on if
100%.
everyone's understanding the rhythm the same way.
100%. If you're in a band with the feelers, usually they start the song over.
Or they're all staring at each other going, uh-oh.
Yeah.
How are we getting out of this one?
And we can feel it, Yeah, absolutely. And we completely agree on how important counting is, and keeping track of rhythm. Do you think, let's say that you're performing a song, and it may depend on the tune or what you're doing, but do you think it's important to literally be counting the entire time? Or do you think that it's good just to keep a general track of the measures and start counting in certain places? Like, are you actually in your head counting 1, 2, 3, 4 the whole time? Or how does that work for you?
If I'm performing it, I want it to be at the level where I'm honestly, I'm kind of singing the song as I play it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I've practiced it so many times, I know how it goes. So the song's going on in my head. And I'm playing along with the singer in my head.
Yes.
I'm not really the singer. I'm often singing the guitar part. So if it's a solo, I'm not doing it out loud, but in my head, I know exactly the rhythm and I'm singing the solo I'm going to be playing.
Yep.
Or if I'm improvising, I'm singing what I want to be playing and hoping that I'm getting as close as possible.
Right. Yeah. 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 I do the same thing. I think when I have a song down really well, I don't count as much. Because like you said, I've got the song in my head. I know it extremely well. A good rule of thumb is if you're going to perform a song, you should have practiced so much you're kind of tired of it. That's a really good rule to
Yes.
be in. But when it's new or when I'm not as confident, I tend to count much more. Like almost the entire time I'm keeping track of every single beat, every single hit I do, because I don't have the song in my mind. So I think counting when you're first starting, learning something, counting a ton is very, very important. And then when you get to the point where you know the song so well, like you're saying, Brian, then when you get to that level, that is good too. But in the beginning, I find that counting is really crucial to being able to get stuff down.
Oh yeah, no, if I'm learning a song, we're starting from square one where I talked about where we're talking our way through the motions.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, on some things, they're similar enough to other things I've played. At this point, I'm not having to go through every single last step. But if it's a new complicated rhythm, like you said, there's some weird stop in there, then absolutely, we're counting that and we're doing that a lot.
Yeah.
We're playing that to the point where I just sing it and it feels so natural. I mean, counting sort of goes away after a while, but it depends. Like with the band I play with now, there's a few songs where if we start too fast, the singer's going to be in trouble at some point. Just
Yeah,
cram the
yeah,
words in. So a little trick I'll use there is I always think, what's the fastest thing the singer has to sing? And
yeah,
I'll sing that part in my head. And then even to start the song, I've definitely got, say it's a 16th note song. 1 and 2. That's going on before then I'll start playing. And you've got that groove established before you even play a note.
yeah.
So you don't ever want any guesswork in there. We're trying to, everything we're talking about is taking guesswork out of the process.
Exactly. Yeah.
We want
That.
to know it's going to work. It's going to work every time, or at least 9 out of 10 times. And
Hmm.
that, well, one other time we've practiced and played enough that we can get ourselves out of that situation too.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things too, is when you do get off time or the drummer messes up or someone messes up and now the band's off, being able to count will save you. Being able to find your rhythms is exactly what will save you and allow you to get back on. And if you're not a good counter, if you're not good at tracking rhythms, you'll be lost for the rest of the song or until someone else in the band who knows their rhythms coaches you on what to do. And I've been both people. And I and I think we've all been both people. With rhythm, I get this question a lot. I'm curious how you coach people on this, but my students ask me a lot is how do you actually know the time signature of a song? How do you go about figuring out time signatures of songs?
A lot of times it's the drummer that gives it away. I mean, if you're talking your typical rock song, the snare drum's basically on 2 and 4.
Hmm.
Okay. If it's we're playing a country song, the drummer's probably the snare is going to be on 2 and 3. If it's in 3/4, dot 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 and dot, it's got that little waltz feel. So a lot of time the drummer will give it away. I mean, if you listen to prog rock music, it's a little bit harder. There's some, odd time signatures and things there, but honestly, odd time signatures are not hard if you take the time to work with them.
Right.
And if you get used to counting odd time signatures, it's like, oh, that's in 5. That's no big deal.
Yeah, it becomes as easy as normal time signatures, you
Yeah,
know?
well, they are normal. It's just not what you're hearing on the radio every day.
You're accustomed to, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people have trouble finding the one, like that pulse, that accent of where things start out first. And you're saying the snare comes on beat 2 and 4, 3 4, 3 4 comes on beat 2 and 3. All very, very accurate, but how can people find the one to begin with?
Um, Start counting at the beginning, and a lot of times, in most music, chord changes are happening on the beginning of the measure.
Yeah.
Not always. Sometimes there's syncopation and thing in there, but a lot of music. So just in the beginning, just start listening. Where are those chord changes? Does it sound like can I count a 4 there? 1, 2, 3, 4. Once I start filling in that information, then listen back. Okay, was the snare hitting on 2 and 4 there, or am I counting it at the right tempo? Things like that, and then play less so you can listen more. I guess is what you want to do there.
Yeah.
So for music like that, and like especially if you happen to have a chord chart in front of you or something, a lot of times put down your guitar. Can you follow that? Like just follow the bouncing ball with your finger. Okay, there's this 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Can I start hearing those chord changes? I mean, I'm assuming we're working off a chart at this point, but if you can follow the chart visually with your eyes and sit there and count along with that, that makes playing it so much easier. If you don't
Yeah.
have a chord chart, write one.
Yeah.
Use it
Yeah.
until you don't need it.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. The one feels like a reset. Like that's the main pulse, and generally that is where the chords change. So if you've lost the one or you can't find it or when to start, just listen out for when that chord changes. And like Brian said, it's not always the case that the chord is going to change on beat 1 and only beat 1. But it's a good place to start because this is what happens the majority of the time. But Brian, I appreciate all of your tips. We've gone through a ton of stuff. Is there any final tips or anything on rhythm that you'd want to say, or did we cover everything you had planned?
We covered everything. The big thing is just make it part of your daily practice. If you do that, you're gonna become a better rhythm player. It takes consistency, it takes working on it, and make sure you be able to say the rhythm before you play it. Don't just jump in trying to do everything at once. So
Yes.
that's really that's the biggest thing. And if you're not sure how to do that, find someone who can help you through the process. That's the other big thing with anything you're learning is so many people try to, for some reason, being self-taught as a guitar player is this big badge of honor, which even though technically for the first 10 years of my life, I was self-taught. But again, the magazines helped me. The neighbors helped me.
Yes.
Other kids at school helped me. You
Uh-huh.
know, no one's truly self-taught.
I had the exact same thing. I was self-taught for the first 10 years. I didn't have a teacher as opposed to the magazines or whatever I could get my hands on. And I had that ego about it. It was like, oh, I did all of this on my own. And then when I went to an actual teacher, I found out that I've just been doing a lot of things wrong for 10 years. And there was a certain level I could have gotten to that I didn't, because I had that ego of I can just figure it out myself, or they're going to hurt my creativity, or all these things that I think a lot of people think that just really, as long as you find a good teacher, are not true.
Right. And it's so much easier if you got someone to guide you through the process.
It is so much easier. It's so much more fun. You quadruple the speed you would have made. I mean, yeah, it helps a ton. But Brian, I know you've got a resource that you want to share with people. Do you want to go ahead and tell some people about that?
Sure. It's a free resource, and it's the 6 easy steps to learn and play any rhythm with perfect time. You can go to that link, musictheoryforguitar.com, and I'll walk you through the exact steps. A lot of the ones are the ones we talked about today, but you'll actually see me taking you through those steps. And if you go through this, you'll have a very good understanding of what you need to do to learn any rhythm. So I highly recommend you go there and pick it up. Again, it's free. So you can start watching that today and improving your rhythm today.
Awesome. Here. And for anyone that wants to grab that, I did put it in the link in the chat. Okay. And if I've also got something as well, if it'll show here, if you want to also figure out 5 easy ways to learn how to train your ear, one of the things that we were talking about with rhythm is you need to be able to hear it and identify it. And that comes into ear training. So if you want to grab that as well, just like Brian's, it is completely free. So you can check that out. The link is in the chat as well. But Brian, let me go ahead and try to get this off here. There we go. Thank you so much for coming on here and giving us your wisdom and talking about rhythm. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for showing up and watching, and we will see you at the next one.